Good afternoon and welcome to today's live stream hosted by Western Sydney Community Forum. My name's Tom Nance, I'm the Manager of Policy and Programs and I'm going to be your host for today. And as I begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we all meet on today. I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends joining us in the virtual room today. So here we are, everyone. We're not where we want to be. You might be in your office at the moment. You might be in your home office. You might be in your lounge room, or like me, you might be hiding from your children in your bedroom. But regardless, we're pleased that you've joined us. And it's great to see so many familiar names in our audience today. Today is the, opportunity for us to reflect on what's been happening in Southwest Sydney, the lessons that we can take from it, and also the things we need to be aware of. And we have some fantastic speakers who are going to assist us with that, who I'll introduce in a moment. I really wanted to acknowledge the role that the human services system's been playing across Western Sydney, and particularly in Fairfield, Liverpool and Canterbury, Bankstown over the last few weeks. It's been hard work and I understand how tired we all are, but I just wanted to give a shout out to all of you in the audience today, as well as beyond. Today is really, as I say, about some of those lessons. And the important thing is you can direct questions to our panel today. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. Firstly, you can raise your hand when you're in the audience on Zoom. We will unmute you and we will get to hear your lovely voice. And we do encourage that because it's a bit lonely up here. The other thing as well you can do, of course, is type your question in the Q&A panel in your chat, and I will direct it appropriately to our panelists. For those of you who are joining us live on YouTube, welcome. In terms of any questions you might have, please pop it in the chat box in YouTube, and our team will route that through to me. So we have a lot to discuss, so let's get straight to it. There's a couple of people I want you to meet. Firstly, I want to introduce Esta Paschalidis-Chilas, and she is, of course, the CEO of Canterbury Bankstown or Canterbury City Community Centre. Welcome, Esta. Thank you for joining us. Our second person on the panel today is John Gilmore. He's the CEO of Community First Step, who are based in Fairfield. Welcome, John. And finally, we have Kamalle Dabboussy. He is the CEO of Western Sydney Migrant Resource Centre, and they're based in Liverpool. So I'll get you all to pop your cameras on, take yourself off mute, and we're going to get cracking. So our first question that I'm going to address to all three of our panelists, but I might start with you, Esther, is what is the biggest challenge that has emerged for you so far during the second wave of COVID-19 in your community?
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I'm on Gadigal land and really proud to be here, and to thank yourself, Billy, and the whole team for having us and bringing us together, because it's this kind of dialogue that helps us all learn, and I'm actually looking forward to learning as much as I'm looking forward to contributing. I think for us, I had a chat to a couple of my people this morning, and what seemed to come through, and I think has come through in the last month, what we're in the 5th week now, is just social disconnection. It's been a big issue for us, for the people that we support, whether it's older people in their homes or young families or mums, whatever the case may be. Social disconnection has been a really big issue in Canterbury Bankstown. And I think coupled with that, probably if I can sneak a second one in, just access to information from sources people can trust. There's been a lot of information, and it's in many ways information overload, and people just understanding what source of information is actually the truth. That's probably been a big issue that's come through for us from a range of different people in our community. So that'd probably be the things that are front of mind for us, Tom.
Thank you, Esther. And John, I'll go to you with the same question. What's been the biggest challenge for you on the ground? And John, the phrase of the year, you're on mute. Oh, and you're on mute again. Sorry, John. There we go.
There we go. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Darkinjung and Guringai land and pay my respects to the traditional owners and their elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Darug Nation, who's the traditional owners of the land where my organisation undertakes a lot of its work. I want to break that into two questions. One is the biggest challenge is that now is the same as we had before last year. And that's ensuring our staff is safe and protected, at the same time responding to the needs of our community and our clients, and that in a responsible and focused way. The challenge that has emerged this time around is actually the poor initial coordination from government agencies. And that's been around food security for people, though that's starting to be addressed. It's around our continuing concerns about child welfare and the real lack of understanding that the challenges that homeschooling has placed and the risk that is existing in the community around the children's welfare, and also around the communication. And that's really been there's been a delay in producing in-language and culturally focused communication strategies that have explained things like the changes in public health orders. We've always been playing catch up, and that's really weakened the community response and also led to the development of a considerable level of community resistance or almost anger in some response. And that's played into the responses around and our difficulties around clear communication strategies around both vaccination and access to vaccination and to testing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. And Kamalle, over to you. I mean, definitely we're hearing some clear themes here, but for you, Kamalle, what did you find on the ground was a major challenge for Western Sydney and Mark?
Well, look, I think there are multiple challenges which has been echoed. Firstly, can I also acknowledge to country the traditional landowners? Can I echo Esta's sentiment and thank West Sydney Community Forum for bringing us together and the audience today. I hope to contribute and learn at the same time. I think in the ground there was we saw that there was an urgency and there was a need that needed quite a strong response. Our challenge is that we aren't funded with any standing capacity, and we had to then really draw upon existing resources and on the goodwill of staff and really had to stretch ourselves to be able to respond to. We found that there was a fair amount of multilingual information that was available, but our research was telling us that only about 55% of the community were getting that information. So we were getting, we could see quite clearly that people weren't getting the information that they are requiring. And we had to then work with our clientele, with our vulnerable clients, and we had to take the message to them, not waiting for them to access the information. We actually had to make contact to our vulnerable clients and give them the information and see if they understood and got them to speak to their family members and to other people in their own communities as well. But to expect people in an ever-changing environment to continually to update themselves and to find out what was going on, that wasn't happening. We had to go to them, and they wanted to receive that information from trusted sources, whether it be the local organisation, grassroots organisation, whether it was community leaders, whether it was religious leaders. And the risk there, of course, is that a lot of that service space that was giving that messages are a volunteer base, and they are tired and they are exhausted. And if the government doesn't do something to resource that volunteer base, there's going to be a huge underpinning of that information sharing, which is going to be lost very soon. So, that's a real risk that we see moving forward as well.
Yeah, definitely some great points there, Kamalle. And a reminder to everyone: feel free to ask questions galore. And I definitely have a couple. I'm going to start with you, John. Now, you alluded to this issue of coordination on the ground, and I guess for me, it's a two-part question. I think the first question is pretty straightforward, which is how important is service communication and coordination at a time like this? But secondly, for our viewers out there, how have you been doing this in Fairfield in a real practical way?
in Fairfield, we have been lucky enough that the place-based organisations have had a framework where the CEOs have a regular meeting with representative from council, generally once a month, sometimes less frequently, and that framework has been a godsend in this situation. And we've now upped that frequency of communication and messaging to first of all, it was twice a week. Then I think last week we met as a group on video conferencing every single day. And that's provided two things. One, it's been critically important in terms of responding to the need of the community, but also it's really given a real demonstration of the value of place-based organisations and how place-based organisations are much better positioned to respond to these needs of the local community than some of the larger kind of whole of state or whole of country organisations. And that's also allowed us as a collective of different organisations to make sure that we're not, because as Kamalle kind of referred to, none of us were funded for this. And all of our activities have had to be either a redirection of existing resources, or in some cases, some additional donations from corporates or from other organisations. But it's meant in terms of, you know, the four big place-based charities and the council in the Fairfield area, we were able to make sure that we didn't duplicate each other's efforts, so that we minimised the overlap, but also that we had then a capacity to better fill the gaps. And so when a situation arose or a family needed support, we were able to, we had those avenues of communication and discussion about which organisation could best respond. And sometimes that was one organisation responding to all of the needs, or sometimes it was one organisation responding to the need for food and another organisation responding to the need of counselling or support, or and that really has been a critical, really critically important outcome of that network of communication.
Yeah, and look, for me, what really shines through is that through communicating that way, as you acknowledge, we don't necessarily have as much resources as we'd like, let alone need, but we're able to spend our resources or use our resources in the best place rather than duplicating. I think that's a really important point. I've got a question from the audience now from Josh, Josh from NBN. Josh, it's great that you're joining us, mate, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. Esther, you mentioned that social disconnection, I should say, is a big issue in Canterbury, Bankstown, and I dare say across New South Wales and Australia right now. What do you think could and should be done to overcome this issue? And you're on mute now, Esther.
Thanks for the question. It's a really good question. I think really for us, it's learning from what it is that we do. We look to others, but we also trust in knowing what we need to do to respond as well. Because, you know, we've been around 50 years. Like John said, you know, place-based services, we know our communities, we know how they like to receive information. We understand how we build trust, and we have that established trust over many years. I think what's worked for us, it's been a bit different for the different kind of segments of the people that we support and assist every day. But I know that telephone, just simple things, telephone trees, we're using WhatsApp a lot. I've got a range of caseworkers across programs doing welfare checks every day. We've got people talking across teams, across organisations about particular people or families they're worried about and how you might assist. So our social media, I'm extraordinarily shocked actually at how much that's increased, the engagement from local people. If we look at our last 28 days, the data shows us, just from our small organisation, medium-sized organisation, that the people we've reached in the last 28 days has increased by 327%, right, on social media platforms. Our engagement is up by 741%. I would never have thought that was the case if you talked to me 5 weeks ago. So people there's a misnomer that people don't want to receive information, that they don't want to do the right thing. There's a lot of negative kind of stereotypical stuff, especially a couple of weeks ago when there was a hard push with, increased police attention and, police on horses and things. So, we can fall into this trap that somehow there's people from certain parts of Sydney that don't want to comply. I just want to say right now, I haven't seen that. I've seen quite the opposite, actually. When people receive the right information in the right form from sources they trust, behaviour does modify. And as I said, today's probably one of the few days that I'm at home. I've been in Lakemba every day for the last 5 weeks. And there is a real different Howden Street to the Howden Street that I know and love. So people have restricted their movements, and that has meant that they've tried to find other ways to stay connected. And we've tried to help that. But it doesn't help when you don't have an area that has a lot of open space, lovely places to walk like I've got in my neighbourhoods. So we have to look at other ways, and that's what we've been doing. And people are engaging with us in whatever shape or form. We use MailChimp. We had a couple of sites in Lakemba and in Roselands that were, hotspots the other day. MailChimp, very, very, very direct to people, direct to women, direct to families, and they're responding, they're opening, they're responding. We're monitoring the data. So I think it's, at the moment, it's front of mind. That social disconnection is front of mind, particularly for women with multiple children in small apartment blocks, for example, small units with not a lot of open space. So it's front of mind for us, and we're just doing whatever we can. We're just trying different things, and different things are working with different subsections. I've taken a lot of calls from older people who just want to have a chat, Tom. They just want to have a chat. They're people that might have come to our centre for a social support group once or twice a week, and now, they might be living alone, and they just want to talk to someone. They just want to have a chat. So we're doing whatever we can to respond in safe, like Don said, in safe ways, in ways that keep our staff safe, keep our clients and communities safe, but somehow connected and in touch.
Thanks.
Can I jump in and just echo and support what Esta has said in a couple of respects. Firstly, the Fairfield community, by and large, has responded really fantastically, and they've responded, and they've done what they've needed to do and what they've been asked to do. And it's sometimes a little bit disappointing that the wider perception is that that's been a problem, and it hasn't. Yeah. Secondly, I want to also echo that we're experiencing the same feedback about social isolation, both with their older people, but also with the young people that our youth team normally are in contact with every day or every school day when they run the youth program. When we make the welfare calls to them, they're also complaining about social isolation. Absolutely. And missing their friends and being unable to engage, and how that social connection is missed. And that, for some people, that's very difficult, because the social composition of Fairfield and southwestern Sydney is a very, very social framework. The families are extended families, and this is where the initial messaging about the lockdown restrictions missed the gate. Is we weren't talking about households, we were talking about families. And people, when you talk about families, they talk about that they're thinking about their aunts, their uncles, their cousins, their second cousins, and so that's what was part of the initial disconnect. But that, for people to be restricted to a household, that's an enormous social impact on our communities, much more than more some of the more the communities in the eastern suburbs or the northern suburbs. The third area I'd want to mention about that is that and I alluded to this at the start about child welfare. The lockdown is really, and homeschooling is really showing up some of the real problems within our community, but because of socioeconomic conditions. Houses don't have enough devices,
Absolutely,
and
John.
they don't have enough access to data because they can't afford it. We have instances where the only internet capable device for a family of 3 or 4 children is mum's smartphone, and they can't. How do they access their online schooling through one smartphone? Even for my own staff, I have staff that have to share the family's laptop with their children, and so if I want to engage in a meeting with those staff members, it's got to be juggled around where the children are not required to be on an online Zoom lesson or team lesson, and a lot of and even where they do have devices, it's the cost and access to the data packages to really participate. And this is a really major issue that is only one part of the whole child welfare homeschooling issue.
And definitely digital inclusion capability and capacity as well is something to consider in terms of impact. But I'm aware I've got people kicking down my door to ask you all questions. And so I've actually got a couple of people with their hands up. I think we might go to Pat first. Very mysterious, Pat. Pat, you're on the air. Well, I'm hoping she is anyway. It's very mysterious.
No, it's me, but I did that by mistake. So I'm just listening and gaining lots of knowledge out of this. Sorry.
Fantastic. Well, as they say on Q&A, I'll take that as a comment, Pat. Thank you very much. So we also have Yusuf Tamim, who's got their hand raised. Yusuf, you're on the air. Yusuf, are you with us?
Yes.
Yusuf,
how are you guys?
Doing well, mate. What's your question for the panel?
Oh, no much question actually. We just need to be patient and follow the house rules, and that's we need to get out to get our freedom. But yes, patience is good for us. My question is that we're all struggling. All the young people that are struggling mental health, they need support. We need to get out there because.
Can I?
And stay blessed, guys. You guys doing a great job. I don't have no question.
Thank you. Could I just quickly add something, as John pointed out in particular, and Esta's pointed out, the communities in our areas have been compliant and have been cooperating with the health orders. That was very evident immediately when the public messaging changed and gave that sense of urgency. People responded. But we've surveyed 155 of our clients and their families to understand what's happening in that space. And can I tell you that the number one reason why people do leave their homes is to get medical advice and medical support, health issues. The second biggest reason why people are leaving their homes is because they had to work and they're in casualised employment. And even if that subsidies kick in now and do provide them some support, they're afraid that if in fact when they do return to work, that job will no longer be available. So there is some real insecurity as far as payments go, and there needs to be added protection in that space. The third space had to do with families. People were actually leaving their home to see families, but not in contravention to the health orders. There were health issues within family members. People volunteer and look after, they got caring responsibilities, they have the childcare responsibilities. So they were the top three reasons why people were leaving their homes. They were terribly compliant with the health orders, but there were particular circumstances that relate to families in our areas. And I think that's really important to note, that even if you talk about households, people cannot. They've got other responsibilities they need to do, and I think that's something the government needs to take knowledge of, is that they need to work within those parameters, not try and change them, because if they continue to try and change them, they're going to hit up against brick walls all the time. So how do they change the orders to meet that reality for people living in Southwest and Western Sydney?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kamalle, in terms of You know, the reasons that people are leaving their home isn't to go to Bondi Beach and have a jog. It's, you know, it's often legitimate reasons, and it's often within the bounds of those regulations. And I'm going to stay with you, Kamalle, because I've actually got a couple of questions that people are asking around the point of community leaders that you alluded to. So often the messaging and the torch gets picked up by our volunteers. And you mentioned earlier how stretched they are and how tired they are. So 2 questions here. Firstly, how do you support the community leaders who are overwhelmed with, you know, these requests for information and access to the community? But also, what are some of the concerns and things that you're hearing off the ground from those community leaders? And how responsive was, you know, the government in terms of you feeding up to that as well? So a lot in those questions, Kamalle, I do admit.
Well, can I say firstly, I have pivoted this week the messaging from staff, and I've told them to start speaking to community leaders about their self-care and their boundaries, and to look after themselves, and trying to tell them that not every media request needs to be fulfilled, and not every request needs to be attended to, but perhaps they can block out some time. So I'm trying to get the messages out to leaders to tell them take care of themselves first and foremost, and this is a marathon, not a sprint. In the information that was coming through, the leaders were responding to those responses from government. But can I say, video messaging, those short video clips that everyone's been putting out, we've had community leaders that had 5 different requests in one day to give short video messaging, and they spent 5 hours doing that and trying to meet just those responses in some instances. We've tried to support them in what they can and can't do in those exercises. We're talking to community leaders to find out what uniqueness they need in their own communities, and some of the messaging that's going to the Cambodian community is going to be different to that going to, say, the Iraqi, Assyrian or Chaldean communities. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's unique, it's tailored, and we're trying to get to respond to their needs and what their communities are telling them. And they are different and they are tailored. There are some similarities, but there's also differences in those communities respectively. So how do we support what they are needing to meet their community responses as well? And it's a hard slog. It's not resourced. It's coming out of the volunteer base, and it's things that we are doing, that we're seeing a need, and we're trying to meet that need and working with those leaders. But first place is listening, trying to respond, looking for the tailored response, and at the moment very strongly for not only leaders but even my staff and my organisation, self-care, boundary setting is really important at this point in time, and to keep that forefront of your thinking.
Yeah, and look, Kamalle, it's a great point. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And kudos to you and your team for really reinforcing that self-care that no doubt the community leaders who are under the pump need to be practicing. So
Tom, can I just jump in there just to reaffirm something that Kamalle just made me think about, which also it's a thread back to John. I just want to say though that those relationships have to be in place already.
Yep.
And I guess from where I'm sitting in Canterbury Bankstown, when I hear John talk about the fact that council meets with CEOs once a month, this is why they've had success, because those relationships are already in place. That mutual respect is already in existence. The dialogue is already happening. So it's not the cart before the horse. And I think my learning after 30 odd years in the sector is that it's at times like these where those relationships are tested, but they already have to be in place. And I'm not seeing that across. And I think that's a learning for me as well as a leader. How do I ensure that I'm part of that solution or part of making that happen in my sphere of influence? Because, it's not, I've gone to maybe 4, 5, 6 roundtables, and they've been fantastic, and they've a lot of information shared by a lot of government agencies, and it's been great. But it's been a lot of top down, and then a lot of pressure on the same, like Kamalle said, a lot of pressure on the same community leaders who might be working across the Southwest if their community spread, and they're really quite drawn out responsibilities for people that aren't actually remunerated. So there is this, for me, there's this massive social capital that exists in place-based organisations, and those relationships need to be in place in order to be able to tap into that social capital when you need it. because we are the best placed to assist government agencies to do what they need to do. That's my view.
Great response, Esther. And I've actually got a question from my YouTube correspondent, Nadiana. The question, please.
Thanks, Tom. The question comes from AB, who asks, how positive or negative has the media's role been?
I'm going to give that to you, Esther, because I'm really curious. And I think
this is a really good question. And I just have to say, I have been the CEO of a migrant resource centre in a previous life. So where Kamalle sits is where I sat between 97 and 2007, and then for another 4 years after that. And it's really, we have to have really honest conversations with ourselves and with people of influence. It's not helpful. The kind of language that was used about the Southwest is not helpful. It's divisive. It's counterproductive. It alienates and isolates. The amount of young people who responded with extraordinary TikToks, and my children have been showing me, young people in my house have been showing me how young people from those communities have responded. They've actually responded with a massive amount of humour, which has been fantastic. But there is an undercurrent of this us versus them. And I put this up on one of my LinkedIn posts, which is really popular, like the East the East meets West divide. Like, we don't really need to be feeding that stuff. So I think the media plays a massive role, and they can work with us and help us get the right messages out, or they can go the other way. And I think that has really settled down. It was quite inflamed that couple of days. It might have been about a week, I think, John and Kamalle, probably about a week where it was, really heightened. And then I think it did dissipate. And I think that came because we had a premier who actually stepped up the unifying language in those daily updates and kind of held the media to account and kind of put a bit of a boundary around what was acceptable language and what wasn't. Because what I felt at that time was I put up a post that said, I thought we're in this together. That's what I thought. Well, actually, maybe we're not. So if you start to use language that alienates people, it's really not going to help when you're trying to manage and contain a highly contagious, corona, strain.
Come on.
Can I add to that? We did a rapid response session very early in the piece, and we had 250 plus leaders from the community, which the Premier then came in. We were trying to do a frontline service support exercise, and that was taken over at that exercise, which was great. An hour before we did that session, police made that wonderful response. Those really strong statements about sending in the troops to Southwest Sydney, and they're going to be mounted police. So you can imagine that session was very heavily influenced with what had happened an hour before that session took place. To the credit, I do think that they did listen, that they heard the anger that was in people's voices. The messaging changed and improved considerably from that date, so that they did take notice of what was being said at that session and what the community's responses were. So I think that there were great positives in the changing of the messaging as time went through. But if you're not prepared for the media, you're not aware of what you're messaging and what you're trying to say to media, I would encourage people not to engage unless you have a very clear set of talking points. You're really clear what your message is you're trying to get through. You're often just reacting, and you're reacting to a point that's sensationalist in the media. Don't engage in that particular space. But if you've got a well thought out message and you've got something to back it up that you need to contribute, then by all means, go and utilize those skills. And I'd also point out one other issue in that space. If we go back to the two removalists whose story came out in the paper, their names were released by somebody to the media. And that has done so much damage within that community, for that community's trust to in turn work with the health authorities. There is a fair degree of concern, a considerable degree of concern of what health traces are actually doing, how much information health is providing over to the police, how much information can you actually trust when you go to the health service. And really that's on the back of names being released and who's being released to the media. So it's a very delicate game, and community trust is absolutely essential. You cannot erode the trust that exists, and the media can erode or it can build. And if you're not purposeful, it will erode.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kamalle. John.
I just add and echo Kamalle's point. There is certainly around the two removalists naming and then the footage of them outside their mother's house after she unfortunately passed. That was in stark difference to how the media has handled the Northern Beaches outbreak, where there is very strong rumours about who was responsible for that, or even the original limousine driver in the eastern suburbs from this outbreak. So people in the Northern Beaches and the eastern suburbs, they get treated with respect and anonymity, but people in the southwest, there's a tendency that to be seen, whether it's deliberate or not, to be seen as being named and shamed. And I think some of this disconnect in the media is not necessarily intentional. Some of it is a factor of the changing perceptions over time. One of the big differerences is when that announcement that Kamalle referred to was about the police coming in and there'd be mounted police into Fairfield. Police consider mounted police as soft policing, but a lot of our communities don't see mounted police as a soft community. Their historic cultural experience of mounted police is quite different and is definitely not a soft policing option. But the communities remembered back to the footage that was shown of Bondi Beach at the start of the outbreak, where people were sitting on the grass and having picnics and walking, and there was no police presence. And that busy video, that footage then was starkly different from what was Bondi and the eastern suburbs were experiencing at the beginning for their lockdown to what the footage showed in Fairfield for our lockdown.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess for me, just some things to pull out, and there's a lot here and still a lot, no doubt we need to get through, but just really echoing what you said, Kamalle, around in terms of changing that narrative and how we can do it as organisations, really the, I guess, catch cry of, be prepared and don't feel the need to speak if you're not clear on your message. I think that's a really important thing for our organisations to consider, because no doubt as the pandemic spreads across Western Sydney, more and more the media will be wanting to get into the community and talking to us. So something definitely to keep in mind. Now, there are a lot of questions that we're trying to get through. I've got many of my own that I'm not allowed to ask. But look, one I'm going to direct to you, John, in particular, but all three of you. Holly Corp asks, what can local government do to support community organisations more effectively during this pandemic?
Good question, Tom.
Well, I think Fairfield Council has been a real demonstration of the right way to do it. Regular communication. So Fairfield Council has been in touch and kept the lines of communication open with all of the local organisations. And more so than really other levels of government, they've demonstrated a real capacity to want to listen. I've been on a number of forums, and I think one that Kamalle ran was one of these where government wanted to tell us what they wanted to, and what we really needed as place-based organisations that were in touch with our communities is we needed an opportunity for government to listen to what the messages that we were saying and what we saw was the need. And so local government, I think, can play a really strong role in that. And this kind of echoes back to this the place-based forum that we have for the local CEOs. When you're busy in normal times, it's easy to think, oh, well, do I really have the time to engage in that? But as Esta pointed out, it's at times like these that those connections and networks, then that's where that really is really important. And so establishing those strong interagency connections is not just a nice thing to do. It's something that is actually critically important and when crisis hits a community, that's even the importance just escalates through the roof.
Great point, John. And one that's well made in terms of, a model where council is doing it quite well. You've articulated that. So no doubt some tangible things to take away from that for our local government colleagues. Now I've got a question from Margaret Sipper. Margaret, thanks for joining us today. And I think I'm going to direct it to you, Esta. How sustainable is this, like for organisations like yours, if this goes on for weeks and weeks? Like as Kamalle said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. How sustainable is this? And do you think the sector can carry this load in the long term?
Oh, thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Tom. It's not sustainable. Part of my organisation is fee for service. And we've got clients and carers who well within their rights to start opting out because they're worried about, people coming into their older person's family member's home. They're very practical issues for people every day. They're making decisions about their safety and the safety of the people they care for. We're really confident that, our workforce is protected. We're obviously in a hotspot. We've got aged care workers who are being tested every 3 days if they're coming into the LGA and obviously then leaving it. For people like me who live and work in the same LGA, I get tested because, I choose to, but not because I have to. There's a massive impost here for NGOs. It's a massive impost. And I don't think it is sustainable, Margaret, because we've also got our core work that we've got to get on with, which is the work that we, are funded to deliver and work that we're committed to. And as Kamalle said earlier, a lot of what we're doing is either service modification of our existing responsibilities or new things that we're doing to respond to the changing situation. So for example, for us, about 2 weeks ago, we just thought we can't just sit on our hands. We went off and just did our own multilingual community video project and just started filming local people that people know, just speaking in their language about the rules because people didn't know about the rules. So you're doing two things. You're trying to deliver against what you already said you were going to do, and you're trying to do that, as John said, in as safe a way as possible. So you're renegotiating your KPIs, you're keeping your workforce safe, you're pausing your volunteers, you're doing everything you can to reconfigure what you were meant to be doing, and then you're trying to respond to the needs of the community as they change, which you are, on the most part, not funded to do. So it isn't sustainable, Margaret. It's not sustainable. And I think for me, a question I put to the Premier in a roundtable last week was that what I'm more concerned about is what are the long-term investments in the Southwest going to look like? Because what I'm hearing is, massive investments in mental health, very important investments in domestic and family violence, a whole range of areas where we know the long game is, looking at what's this going to look like in 5 years. But if those resources and investments don't flow through to organisations like ours, then how is the Southwest going to deal with the long-term impacts of this pandemic? Because we were already behind the eighth ball to start with from a socioeconomic and from an equity point of view. So we'll get through this. We've done it before and we'll do it again and the community gets through it. But for me, it's about the long game. What does the future look like for the Southwest? How will those resources, and the question I put to the Premier was, will those resources be targeted in order to flow? And if there are organisations who are saying they're working in my region and you give them money, you make sure they're actually working with us. You have them prove that they're working with us and that they're working in partnership. It's really important. We'll work with anyone because we want our skills to come to the table. We want their skills to come to the table, but we need to be working together, and those resources actually need to get to the people who need them.
A great point, Esta. And I'm aware of time. We've still got some hands up and some questions unanswered. I'm going across to Turkan, who's been waiting patiently with her hand up. Turkan Aksoy, of course, from Welcoming Cities. Welcome to the chat, Turkan. Turkan, are you there? I believe this is what they call in the industry technical difficulties. So we're just going to pop Turkan off to the side for a minute, and we'll hopefully return to the question. I'm going to now look at another question. So in terms of, I guess, we've heard, about communication being, such an issue, so paramount to what we need to achieve. For you, Kamalle, what's your communication strategy for the community, particularly those who have no access to information and have no link to community leaders or community organisations?
Well, that's the communication strategy is us working, as I said, on a tailored response with individual communities. We are speaking to the leadership. We're trying to get to them to understand how the best way to talk to people in their communities. Speaking to family members, and we identified from previous lockdowns that particularly mums with young children are the ones that are possibly the most isolated in that picture. We actually had better digital uptake with senior communities than we had with mums with preschool aged children. So we've focused very heavily on building some links in those spaces over the last period of time as well. So getting them to speak to each other and getting them to promote within their communities is a very important point for us. But also trying to get from government a unified message that doesn't change every single day is actually one of our biggest challenges that we do have. The simple messaging of isolate and test is important. We're also finding that behind the anger of the vaccination issue, people are trying to get vaccinated and can't. And then there's some degree about confusion as to the effectiveness and the side effects of possible vaccination. It's actually being hard to get some of that messaging behind that as well. So we're seeing insights. I don't have the solution. These are things that we continue to work at. Our speciality is trying to work with vulnerable and hard to reach communities. That's put us in a reasonably good position to try and get their messaging out in the Liverpool area. But it's a work in progress. It continually evolves. And as much as you're talking, you're listening, and you really need to listen and take that message back from those grassroots community leaders as well. Communities want to get the messages from their GPs, from the local grassroots organisations. Those place-based organisations have really come into their own, if I can put it that way, during this crisis.
A great point, Kamalle. And again, I want to reiterate, how important community services have been during this, and congratulate each and every one of you in the audience and beyond. Time for a couple more questions. I know we're running out of time at a rapid rate.
Tom, could I interrupt you? I'm so sorry. I can't control the environment that I'm in, and I'm going to have to step out at this point in time. Maybe you'll explain why. Unless there's something else you wanted to ask me in passing, I might step out.
Kamalle, we fully understand. A virtual round of applause to you. Thank you for joining us today in interesting circumstances. And I'll definitely be chatting with our two remaining panelists as well. Take care.
Thank you very much. If there are questions that are unanswered that somebody does want to ask me that's burning, by all means, drop us a line to the MRC, and I'm happy to answer them offline or through West Sydney Community Forum as well. Absolutely.
Fantastic. We have that on public record now. Feel free to spam Kamalle's inbox with your questions. Thank you very much, Kamalle. So look, I'm going to cross to you now, John. I've got, a really interesting question asked by Julie. She's asked, what do you think is the best way that those who live and work outside Western Sydney can help the organisations in there and the communities in Western Sydney? And I think that's a cracker. Well done, Julie. John, what do you think?
One of the things that has been really concerning me is the level of vaccine hesitancy, and I think as a community, we, each and every one of us, needs to engage in this debate. And being anti-vaccine is not an issue of personal choice or religious belief or anything. It is an anti-social belief structure that then propagates lies and disinformation. We do not let people drive on the right-hand side of the road just because they want to. Taking vaccines is in the same category. It's about what we need to do as members of society. I'm probably one of the oldest people here that will remember the devastation things like polio inflicted on our community, of children growing up in leg braces. There was a lady in my mother's hometown that had to live her life in an iron lung, and countless people lost their lives and families lost children because of polio. That's been eradicated because of vaccines. I also remember the families that were friends of my parents having children that, because the mother had measles during pregnancy, their children were born blind and deaf and unable to speak. That's been eradicated because of vaccines. So vaccine hesitancy is actually an attack on our society, an attack on the fundamental safety, and we have a resistance to engage in that debate that I think every person in New South Wales and every person in Australia should not step back from that debate. If we encounter vaccine hesitancy, we should now, this is a matter of social survival. We need to engage in that debate and discredit the falsehoods that are being perpetrated and engage in a fact-based discussion to clearly articulate that not taking a vaccine is not an appropriate response. That might be a bit hardline, but that's what I think. Right now, that's the battle that every single citizen in Australia needs to, or resident of Australia needs to engage in.
Yeah. Look, well said, John. Strong words, and no doubt there's going to be people in the audience who strongly agree with you there. Esther, your thoughts?
I just wanted to jump in and support John and say it's actually the first time that I've heard someone who has lived through a time when vaccines didn't exist for certain illnesses. So hearing John has influenced me. So, you know, what I brought up before that I wanted to share, which is actually in line with this, because I'm thinking about the long game, was that we supported some research that the New South Wales Council of Social Services started to do before Delta. And I'm just reading off it, you know, 58% of the people interviewed were keen or had received the vaccine. This is within CALD communities now, culturally and linguistically diverse communities. 29% were unsure, 13% did not want the vaccine. Figures which are in line with the recent data from the general community of New South Wales. So that vaccine hesitancy is across the community, and it's not unusual in certain, you know, pockets of the community. So the message isn't getting out broadly. And I think Saturday's events, as sobering as they were, shows us a lot about what's going on in our society right now. One of my most popular personal Facebook pages in the last year, personal posts in the last year, has been a post I posted on Saturday night after those protests. And it was a very strong but very polite post. And yet the venom that myself and my family have gotten back as a result of that post has been extraordinary, actually. And members of my family are getting private messages, you know, my 18-year-old, you know, etc. And, you know, it is about, are we in this together or not? And, you know, can we look at factual evidence that's credible to make educated decisions?
Yep.
And, you know, there was one of the questions that Tom was going to put to us, and it made me think a lot about the whole vaccination messaging. And I think John's right, that is our current and immediate kind of future challenge. I totally support what John's saying about, and those small conversations, you know, the questioner asked, you know, how can you help? It's those small conversations in your sphere of influence that then someone else goes and has a conversation, even writing the misinformation and just trying to have those conversations to just give a balanced perspective.
Yeah, look, well said, both of you. And I think really that's, you know, to answer your question, Julie, that's one thing we can pick up and run with, whether we're in Southwest Sydney, Western Sydney, the dreaded Northern Beaches, or wherever else in New South Wales and in Australia. That's definitely one thing tangibly, whether we're in this sector or outside of it, that we can all pick up and run with. And John, I wouldn't have put you a day over 30, mate, so it surprises me. Look, we're just about to wrap up in the interest of time. And look, the question for both of you that I'm going to finish on. What do you wish you knew? And we've only got 1 minute for each of you, even though it's a massive question. What do you wish you knew 5 weeks ago when this was all kicking off in Southwest Sydney that you know now? John, I'll go to you.
Thanks, Tom. I suppose there's two things. One is back related to my previous comments is how common the anti-vaccine sentiment was and how poor the level of communication and understanding about the real truth and the importance of vaccines were. And I wish I knew that to start that community education program, because and it's not about telling, spinning a yarn. It's about the truth, and it's about the truth about vaccines. The second area that I wish I knew is the seriousness and of the impact of the lockdown on children, particularly young children, and their families. I mean, in our community, we're really concerned because parents, sometimes because of their language background or base education, are not equipped to be able to support children doing home learning. There are also that the families don't have, as I mentioned, don't have the devices and don't have the data width to do it. And now we're concerned about the level of in-household violence that is increasing, and that's sibling to sibling, it's parent to child, and it's partner to partner. And while it's still difficult for even older people, partners and older young people to communicate, it's even harder for the under 12-year-olds. And we've lost, with the school lockdown, we've lost a whole level of referral and access and identification of child welfare issues. But in saying that, it absolutely shouldn't be put back on the education system. It shouldn't be a responsibility of the teachers. We as a community need to respond to that, to that child welfare and child support needs, separate from teaching.
Yeah, great points, John. And Esther, quickly to you. What do you wish you knew 5 weeks ago?
That was an interesting question when I read it this morning, Tom. My first instinct was to know just how long we're going to be in it, because it's really hard to, run services, support people and not have a sense of how long, even if it was just to know from the start, look, it's going to be at least 4 weeks, or it's going to, just some sense. This inertia that comes with sort of waiting at 11 o'clock, well, what's the announcement, and now today we heard there's going to be more announcements tomorrow. We're splitting our city. What are we doing? So the inertia that creates and the stress and anxiety that creates, I think I would have loved to have known. The other thing I thought about was, and I've written it down, having our vaccination messages ready ahead and early in the right form, consistent, saying the same things. I think the whole shift in the narrative around AstraZeneca has been really confusing for people, particularly people whose first language isn't English. It's not, and then it's good, and then it's not, and then it's, so it's just having those messages ready with the right facts, as John said. And the biggest thing for me that's emerging over time is just, I think, the pressure on the mental health of young people. I know John's talked about the under 12s, but front of mind for us at the moment is, your HSCers particularly, there's a lot of anxiety around what's the future look like. And it's an area that we haven't really in the Southwest kind of looked at as much as we might kind of in the near future.
Yeah.
Can I add, Tom, if somebody's going to grant my wish, then I want to make the wish a cure for COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely on the top of a lot of people's lists. And look, on that note, I'm going to thank both of you. Thank you, Esta Paschalidis-Chilas, CEO of Canterbury City Community Centre. There's 4 C's in it.
Just say 4 C's. It's all right.
And of course, John Milmore from Community First Step, and of course, Kamalle, CEO of Western Sydney MRC, who left us just moments ago. So just to wrap up, as both of you pop your cameras off, look,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who's joined us today. I hope it's been valuable for you all. Particularly wanted to note we didn't get to all your questions, but don't worry, we're keeping an eye on them and trying to respond as best as we can. One thing I will note is there were a couple of questions around advocacy and what we can do at a systemic level. Western Sydney Community Forum is definitely looking at this space, and we've been pretty active in the past 24 hours around eligibility for not-for-profits in terms of government assistance. So watch this space. Not only that, if you have any ideas around advocacy, if you want to talk to anyone, from the forum about what's going on the ground for you, please reach out, let us know. Not only that, I just want to say to all of you, please take care of yourselves. As Kamalle said, self-care is of primary importance right now. If you need to reach out, call Lifeline, call your colleagues, call your friends, but please do take care of yourselves. Thanks very much for your time. Stay safe, and I hope to see you all soon.